There's been lots of conversations in the studio while we're making the work for this show at Baltic about when a painting's finished, which is a really interesting thing to try and work out. One of the things as a painter is like when you're like right on the edge of the painting working, and then you do too much and it feels a bit dead. It's almost like there's this point where you stop and there's just enough there for it to look like a painted surface and like an image, and it's that really pleasurable like knife edge where you can kind of see both things at the same time. Yeah, I think we're both interested in that point where the image sort of falls apart. Like it's a coherent image that's got a solidity and a sense of like, it's like well described, but then when you get up close in two contrasting ways, there's like a point where the image falls apart. And I think there's that relationship between figuration and abstraction in slightly different ways, but we're both interested in that, how an image is broken down and then recreated. So with my paintings, there can be such a change between a few marks can make a face and then one brush mark completely erodes that and then you've got to make it again. There's an inherent vulnerability in that, leaving things so unfinished or unrefined. Working on such a large scale, it's all quite exposed, like the way the image is made is quite an exposed process. You've got this really large painting, but there's like this really thin skin of paint on it, but then a really strong sense of presence. Like when you get up to the paint and look at it up close, you can see that it's all these quite loose, like abstract marks, but then from a distance it really forms together to make something that looks almost real. And I think we're both really interested in that. The contrast between what you think something's going to look like and then you get up close and it's almost like you've been tricked, but in quite a pleasurable way, hopefully. I think the idea of using the analogue is definitely something we both share, like that sort of common interest. So for me, I use 80s and 90s images because I feel like they're the images that I grew up with, absorbing media that was not digital, so analogue filmmaking. And I feel like this lends itself to painting the idea of the distortions and the colours that come through on VHS and physical media. With mine, it's more the idea that it's a singular image. Like nowadays, everything's digitised or online and really repeatable, where there's something quite arresting about a singular analogue photograph that is really sort of compelling. And I think that idea could potentially be overlooked is even stronger because there's just one of that image. So I really like the idea of taking these potentially overlooked moments and then giving them this sense of like importance, or like making them almost like iconic in a way, and like the everyday becoming iconic. The thing that I like about looking through the films is that you never quite know what you're going to find. It'll be a particular colour or a sense of light that I think like to try and make that in paint would be really interesting. A lot of the time the image is selected based on the kind of movement I might want. If something's got reflections in it or water, sometimes I want the figure to be moving, sometimes I want the paint to move the figure. It's quite intuitive, I think, for both of us though, isn't it? Yeah, sometimes it's a gut feeling, sometimes it's really directed. It's like certain ones that make me feel the pull to try and paint them. In terms of the process of painting, especially for the large works, I tend to mix the paints in advance in sort of large buckets and paint containers. And then after that, the process is quite intuitive and quite fast. So they're usually made within about two or three sessions, sometimes all in one go. And this is to sort of try and capture some kind of like a sense of energy that I want to get in the painting, trying to push and pull between what the paint wants to do and trying to also make it describe something. The figure features in all of my paintings. I think it acts as quite a good sort of anchor amid the chaos of like the paint marks. It's quite a good way to invite the viewer into the painting. So the painting process itself, for me, it's quite slow. So I usually work on several paintings at once. And I work quite traditionally actually in lots of thin layers and glazes of oil paint, starting off really pale and light and then getting darker and thicker as it goes on. So on a painting there'll usually be like 6 or 7 layers of oil paint. And then the other part that's developed in my work most recently, which is even more evident in the large works at Baltic, is I don't use white paint. I always wipe back, to make the light areas of the painting, I wipe back oil paint to the white of the canvas, which at first people wouldn't really notice, but it's become quite an important part of the process, as I think it gives the paintings this feeling of luminosity and screen-like feel to them, as if they're almost backlit because the light is kind of coming off the canvas. So quite often there'll be like a knitted texture or like a cotton or like hair and things that are, for me, are things that really stir feeling, like evocative of memory. For the yellow image of the cardigan, for instance, I wiped back to create the knitted texture with like my knuckle and a piece of rag. So there's this sense that it's a handmade material that's been knitted, but then I've depicted it in a way that my hands have also like remade it. So the title of the exhibition is Remember Somewhere, which is taken from a found song lyric. We chose it because we felt like it summed up some of the main themes of the show and the connections between our work. So the remember part of it obviously references memory and ideas around that and a collective memory that we all have, and how we all store memories as images. And somewhere points towards the idea that when you look at a painting, you're sort of transported to a different place or a different time. The viewers are invited into the conversations we've had in the studio, which is quite a unique opportunity for us because we haven't had a chance to show this many paintings together and have that dialogue between us. So it's interesting, it's almost like the viewer can walk around in amongst that dialogue and piece those things together. And then that in turn, like just how they physically hold the space together is really interesting, and you start to see these connections and threads between stuff that you can't see in a cramped up studio when everything's like piled on top of each other, like giving the work space to be able to see what happens when you put them in the same physical space. And I think especially being twins as well, like being sisters and twins and sharing a studio space, we're quite consciously, like for a couple of decades, we've both been painters, carving out our own identity and our own individual languages. So it's quite a nice point in our careers to actually like bring things together and see what it is that is similar and is connected, rather than like trying to like separate things out. It's like coming, like bringing things together. Yeah, embracing that and seeing what happens.